Speaker. A question for the Minister of Commerce. Will he use his powers under Part 4 of the Commerce Act 1986 to call for an investigation into the dairy wholesale and retail milk market following the release of the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry's review of the domestic milk market in New Zealand? If not, why not?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the Commerce Commission can of course undertake its own on its own initiative undertake an inquiry under Part 4 or an enforcement investigation if it has concerns. With respect to the Minister's powers to initiate an inquiry, that inquiry under that capacity under Part 4 of the Commerce Act is related to concerns with monopolies, and there would need to be a pretty tough test applied to make an inquiry justified.
Sue Kedgley.
Supplementary. Does he agree that competition in New Zealand's dairy wholesale market is limited by the fact that there are just two major players, Fonterra and Goodman Fielder, and that Goodman Fielder is required to purchase all its milk from its competitor, Fonterra?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member will be aware of the history of the structure of our domestic milk market, which is that going back to the formation of Fonterra in the early 2000s, there was agreement at the time to limit Fonterra's capacity to be a domestic monopoly. They were required to sell some assets at the time, and for most of the last 10 years I think people have been, we've all been generally happy that there was a sufficiently competitive domestic milk market. But clearly Fonterra has an interest in ensuring that domestic milk market doesn't undermine its export strength.
Sue Kedgley.
Supplementary. Does he agree that a company that controls around 95% of the market for dairy products has a virtual monopoly on the market and therefore has no incentive to minimise prices? If not, why not?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm not sure that it controls 95% of the domestic market. It certainly controls a very significant proportion of the export market. There has been ongoing discussions in the context of dairy regulation between the government and Fonterra about issues such as the transparency of milk pricing. I think we're all aware that New Zealand consumers must be protected from the potential for dominance of the market by Fonterra. And I believe up until now, both the previous government and the current government have acted to protect consumers.
Supplementary. Does he agree that the fact that we have a virtual milk monopoly selling to a supermarket duopoly may be contributing to the high price of milk and requires further investigation? And if not, why not?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the arrangements around Fonterra certainly need to be kept under scrutiny continuously, because there is always the potential that such a large company could influence the domestic market. However, there isn't a lot of evidence that they have been behaving in a monopolistic manner. The market seems to have worked reasonably well over the last 10 years, but I think it's natural that when prices rise, that consumers are asking the question, and we need to be able to demonstrate to them that they are protected.
I beg your pardon, I'd already started to call Sue Kedgley, so Sue Kedgley.
Does he agree that in a concentrated market which is dominated by a very small number of big players, there needs to be scrutiny of how retail prices are set so that consumers can be confident that the prices they're paying are fair?
The Honourable Bill English.
Speaker, yes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, is he aware of the advice from the majority Māori-owned company Miraka Limited that they saw MAF and the Commerce Commission as playing a kaitiaki role in terms of ensuring fairness within the system? And what assurance can he give the House that fairness for consumers will be prioritised to protect New Zealanders from suffering further price increases for dairy products such as milk, cheese and butter, which have already increased 19.7% on average over the past 3 years?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, me raka, as others would expect the Commerce Commission and MAF to be guardians of the consumer interest, and in this circumstance, if the Commerce Commission has the power to initiate an inquiry if it thinks there's grounds for doing that. I would say that an increase in prices of itself isn't evidence of monopolistic behaviour. In this case, it's plausible at least to believe that the sharp increases in export prices for dairy products is the main reason for the increase in the domestic milk price. If there of course significant evidence that the price is being manipulated, then the Commerce Commission has the ability to inquire into that.
Sue Kedgley.
Given growing consumer concern about the high price of milk, does he agree that an investigation is needed to see whether there's any evidence that high milk prices are a result of either insufficient competition in the sector or the result of a dominant player abusing its market position and passing excessive margins and costs onto New Zealand consumers?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I've said, the Commerce Commission has the power to initiate an inquiry if they think there are grounds for it, and a minister can potentially initiate an inquiry. In both cases, an increase in prices of itself isn't evidence of market manipulation, but if there was significant evidence, then either the Minister or the Commerce Commission, I'm sure, would consider it.
Sue Kedgley.
Has he seen claims by farmers that they receive less than 30% of the price of milk? And doesn't he think, therefore, that that there ought to be a Commerce Commission investigation into what makes up the remaining 70% of the retail price?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's a time-honoured tradition among farmers to complain about the small proportion of the total price that they receive, and it's been going on for as long as I can remember, and I don't expect that it will ever change regardless of the market prices. But again, I don't think that in itself isn't evidence that the market's being manipulated, but I think where we agree is we need to be very vigilant when there's such a major company with a large market share. If there's evidence that they are manipulating the prices against the interests of consumers, then the Commerce Commission has the capacity to look into that.
Question number 11.